He was just another passenger, asleep like everyone else, until the captain's trembling voice shattered the silence. "Is there any fighter pilot on board?" In that moment, hundreds of lives hung by a single thread, and only one man could decide their fate. Let's continue this story. The hum of the engines was steady, the soft cabin lights glowing above as passengers settled into their seats. A routine flight from New York to London had just taken off, and most people were doing what they usually did on long flights: reading, listening to music, or trying to sleep. But no one on board knew that before this journey ended, the fate of everyone sitting in those narrow rows of seats would rest in the hands of one man. A man most of them hadn't even noticed when he boarded. He was tall, broad-shouldered, and quiet, with skin as dark as midnight and an expression that seemed calm, almost distant. He slid into his seat near the back of the plane, leaned against the window, and within minutes, his eyes were closed. To everyone else, he was just another tired traveler, nothing more. But when the captain's trembling voice would later break through the intercom, asking in desperation, "Is there any fighter pilot on board?" the truth about this man's past would shake everyone to their core. For now, though, no one cared. A young boy was kicking the back of a seat. A mother was humming softly to her baby. Businessmen were typing on laptops. The man in the back didn't move. His name was Marcus Reed. To the world, Marcus was just an ordinary man in his late 30s, dressed in a simple gray hoodie and worn jeans. But hidden behind his quiet eyes was a history no one could have guessed. Marcus had once been one of the best fighter pilots in the U.S. Air Force. Years of grueling training, countless missions, and a career that had made him both respected and feared had defined his life. But Marcus had left all of that behind, walking away from the cockpit after something had happened, something he never talked about, not even to his closest friends. The cabin crew moved down the aisles, offering drinks and snacks. Marcus stirred briefly when the cart rattled past, murmured a polite, "No, thank you," and returned to his deep, steady sleep. To the other passengers, it looked like nothing could disturb him. But trouble was already brewing far above the Atlantic Ocean. In the cockpit, Captain Harris was gripping the controls tightly, his forehead damp with sweat. His co-pilot glanced nervously at the monitors. Something wasn't right. At first, it was just a technical warning, a flashing light that suggested a sensor error. But within minutes, the crew realized it wasn't a glitch. A foreign aircraft was shadowing them, closing in dangerously fast. They had no way of knowing who was inside or why they were being followed, but one thing was clear: the plane and its hundreds of passengers were in danger. Captain Harris tried to stay calm, his voice steady as he spoke to air traffic control, but the static on the line and the distance over the ocean made communication difficult. And then came the moment that changed everything. The unknown aircraft drew closer, its silhouette visible even to some of the passengers who peered nervously through the small windows. Murmurs spread through the cabin. People began asking questions, their voices uneasy. The captain's voice finally crackled through the intercom. "Ladies and gentlemen, this is your captain speaking. We are experiencing an unusual situation. If there is anyone on board with military flight experience, particularly a fighter pilot, please make yourself known." His voice wavered on those last words. A ripple of shock went through the passengers. A fighter pilot? On a commercial flight? Why would the captain even ask such a thing? Fear began to build like a wave moving through the rows. Parents pulled their children closer, businessmen closed their laptops, eyes widened, and whispers filled the air. In the very back, Marcus's eyes slowly opened. His instincts, buried but never forgotten, jolted him awake. He heard the announcement clearly, every word echoing in his mind. Fighter pilot. A call for help. A situation he had hoped he'd never be dragged into again. He rubbed his face, exhaled, and for a moment, just sat there. The weight of memory pressed on him. Cockpits, controls, missiles streaking through the sky, the roar of engines, and that one mission he could never forget. He had promised himself he would never go back to that life. Never again put himself in a position where lives depended on him. But now, sitting there in seat 32A, Marcus knew he had a choice to make. Ignore the captain's plea, or stand up and reveal who he really was. Passengers kept looking around, waiting for someone to move. Seconds stretched into long, unbearable moments. The captain repeated his call, this time his voice sharper, edged with fear. If there is anyone with fighter pilot experience, please, we need you. Marcus closed his eyes again, but only for a second. Then he slowly unbuckled his seatbelt. The sound of the metal clicking open seemed louder than it should have been. People in nearby rows turned to look as he stood, his tall frame towering over the seats. A flight attendant rushed toward him, her eyes wide. "Sir, are you?" she began, but Marcus nodded once, firmly. "Take me to the captain." Gasps spread through the passengers. Relief, disbelief, fear, it was all mixed together. As Marcus walked down the aisle, the whispers followed him. Some people stared in awe, others clutched their loved ones tighter, wondering what was about to happen. Marcus didn't look at them. His face was calm, unreadable, but inside, his pulse was racing. He hadn't been in a cockpit in years. Could he still do it? Could he really step back into the role of the man he once was? He didn't have the answer yet. All he knew was that the captain needed him, and hundreds of lives were at stake. The door to the cockpit loomed ahead, and as it opened for him, Marcus Reed, the man who had been just another sleeping passenger minutes ago, was about to step back into a world he thought he had left forever. The cockpit smelled faintly of coffee and metal, the air tense and heavy. Captain Harris looked up as Marcus entered, surprise flashing across his weary face. The co-pilot glanced at him skeptically, as if trying to measure whether this stranger was really the help they needed or just a desperate man looking for attention. Marcus stood tall, his deep voice calm but steady. "I'm a former U.S. Air Force fighter pilot. Marcus Reed. What's happening out there?" The captain exhaled with relief, motioning for him to step closer. "We've got an unidentified aircraft closing in. No response to radio contact. It's flying dangerously near our flight path. I don't have the training to handle something like this." His voice broke slightly as he admitted it. The co-pilot frowned. "Even if you were a fighter pilot, this isn't a jet. It's a passenger plane. What can you even do?" Marcus ignored the doubt. He leaned over the radar, studying the blip on the screen, then moved to the window for a direct look. Through the darkness, the faint outline of a sleek fighter jet shimmered under the moonlight. It wasn't U.S. military, that much was clear. His chest tightened. Whoever was piloting that jet was not here for routine escort duty. This was intimidation. Or worse. He turned back to the captain. "How much fuel do we have?" The captain blinked at the question. "Enough to reach London. But why?" Marcus's mind was racing. Old instincts were snapping back like muscles that hadn't been stretched in years. "Because if they force us to divert, if they try to push us into hostile airspace, we need to know exactly how far we can go." The co-pilot shook his head. "Wait, you can't just take charge," but the captain cut him off. "He knows what he's doing. For now, we follow his lead." Marcus's hands hovered over the controls, not to fly the plane. Commercial cockpits were different, slower, heavier than the fighter jets he once commanded, but to guide, to direct. He didn't need to fly this machine like a jet. He needed to think like the enemy, to predict their moves. "They're testing us," he muttered. "They want to see how we respond." Down in the cabin, fear spread like wildfire. Passengers were on edge, whispering, praying, clinging to each other. A little girl asked her mother why there was another plane so close, and the mother had no answer. Rumors filled the air: terrorists, war, hijacking. No one knew the truth, and uncertainty was worse than any answer. Marcus kept his eyes locked on the intruder outside. Every detail mattered: the angle of approach, the distance, the slow circling movements. He recognized the model now, a Russian-made Sukhoi, powerful, agile, and lethal in the wrong hands. His jaw tightened. Whoever was flying that jet wasn't here by accident. Suddenly, the fighter tilted its wings sharply, a gesture Marcus knew too well. It was a threat, a warning. The captain paled. "What does that mean?" Marcus's voice was low. "It means they want us to follow. They're hurting us." The co-pilot muttered. Hurting us where?" Marcus's silence was answer enough. He knew exactly where this could lead: into restricted airspace, into a trap, maybe even into a political nightmare that none of these innocent passengers would survive. Marcus turned to the captain. "We need to send a distress signal. Now." Harris nodded quickly, fumbling with the comms, while Marcus dictated the code word from memory. An emergency pilot signal meant only for situations of dire threat. Somewhere thousands of miles away, in a control room, alarms would be ringing now, scrambling authorities, alerting NATO, alerting whoever still had the power to intervene. But it would take time. And time was the one thing they didn't have. The fighter jet surged closer, so near now that its nose almost seemed to scrape the wing of the passenger plane. Gasps echoed from the windows as passengers saw it up close. Panic was building. The flight attendants struggled to keep people calm, but their own faces betrayed their fear. Marcus's thoughts flashed back to his last mission, the one that had made him leave the Air Force. He had been ordered to take down a hostile aircraft that refused to respond, only to discover too late that a civilian pilot had been inside. The weight of that decision had haunted him for years. It was why he had walked away. And now here he was again, faced with another impossible situation, with hundreds of lives depending on him. Options? The captain asked desperately. Marcus didn't answer immediately. He was calculating, running through every scenario in his head. Then he spoke. We can't outmaneuver them, not in this plane. But we can buy time. We make it look like we're complying. Drift slightly toward their path, but not enough to take us off course. Meanwhile, we wait for backup to arrive. The co-pilot looked horrified. And if backup doesn't arrive? Marcus's eyes darkened. Then I'll find another way. For the next tense minutes, Marcus guided the captain and co-pilot through small, careful adjustments. The massive passenger jet shifted just enough to appear cooperative, though Marcus kept them aligned with their true flight plan as best he could. Sweat dripped down his neck, his focus razor-sharp. The fighter pilot outside seemed to watch them, circling like a predator. Down below, passengers were growing restless. A young man finally stood and shouted, "What's going on? Why are we following that plane?" His words only fed the fear. Flight attendants rushed to hush him, but whispers spread. "We're being hijacked. They're taking us somewhere. We're not going to make it." In the cockpit, Marcus heard the murmurs through the door and knew the cabin was close to breaking into chaos. He glanced at Captain Harris. "We need to reassure them. Say something." The captain nodded, pressing the intercom. "Ladies and gentlemen, please remain calm. We are in communication with authorities and taking precautionary measures. Your safety is our top priority." His voice was steady, but the tremor beneath it wasn't lost on the passengers. The fighter jet suddenly broke formation, darting ahead before looping back in a menacing arc. Marcus felt his stomach twist. This was more than intimidation now. This was a signal. Another aircraft could be coming. Reinforcements. He tightened his fists. "It's not just one," he whispered. "They're not alone." The co-pilot froze. "What do you mean?" Marcus looked out into the night sky, scanning the darkness. His voice was grim. "This is just the beginning." The cabin air felt heavier with each passing second, as if the fear of the passengers was thickening into something almost visible. Marcus kept his eyes locked on the night sky. The Sukhoi fighter jet was no longer alone. Out of the darkness, faint lights flickered. Another aircraft approaching, and then another. Within minutes, there were 3 jets circling the passenger plane like wolves stalking a wounded deer. The co-pilot's voice cracked. "We're surrounded." Captain Harris gripped the controls tightly, his knuckles white. "My God," he turned to Marcus. "What do they want? Why us?" Marcus's jaw was tight. He knew exactly why. This flight path crosses near contested airspace. We're a symbol, an American plane full of civilians. They're testing boundaries. If they can force us down, they send a message to the world. The captain stared at him. "Force us down? Where?" Marcus didn't answer immediately. His mind replayed maps, borders, the tension between nations that most civilians never thought about. Finally, he spoke quietly. "There's a military base not far from here. If they push us that way, we'll be landing in hostile territory." The silence in the cockpit was deafening. The co-pilot muttered a curse under his breath. "That's suicide. We can't." Marcus cut him off sharply. "Which is why we don't let it happen." He leaned closer, his voice steady but firm. "Listen to me. These jets can kill us in seconds. But they won't, unless we give them a reason. They want control, not destruction. So we make them believe they have it, while keeping our own path alive. Every move we make has to be deliberate, calculated. One mistake, one wrong signal, and they'll think we're resisting. That's when they'll act." The captain nodded, trusting Marcus more with every word. The co-pilot still looked unconvinced, but he obeyed. Outside, the jets tightened their circle, the roar of their engines audible even inside the cabin. Some passengers pressed their faces against the windows, gasping at the sight of sleek metal predators darting so close. A little boy cried, "Mama, they're going to crash into us." His mother held him close, whispering reassurances she didn't believe herself. Marcus felt every second drag like an hour. His chest was heavy with memory, missions where he had been in those jets, where he had been the one circling a target. He knew the mindset of those pilots out there. Trained, focused, relentless. He also knew they would be receiving orders from somewhere far away, voices cold and detached, treating this like a chess match rather than hundreds of human lives. Then, through the static of the comms, a garbled message broke through. A foreign accent, thick and stern, American plane. Follow coordinates. Change course immediately. The words sent shivers through the cockpit. Captain Harris looked at Marcus in alarm. Marcus's voice was calm, though his pulse thundered. "Don't respond." "Not yet." The co-pilot's eyes widened. "Are you insane? They'll fire if we ignore them." Marcus shook his head. "They won't. Not yet. They're testing. They want obedience, not war. If we hold out long enough, backup will arrive." But holding out was easier said than done. Down in the cabin, panic was spreading. A man stood and shouted, "They're hijacking us. We're all going to die." His outburst ignited chaos. People screamed. Some prayed loudly. Others demanded answers from the flight attendants, who themselves were shaking with fear. The captain's reassurances over the intercom no longer calmed anyone. Marcus clenched his jaw. He couldn't let the fear erupt into a full riot. If passengers panicked and tried to storm the cockpit or interfere, they would only make things worse. He spoke firmly to Captain Harris. "Keep them calm. Whatever you say, sound confident. If they believe we're in control, they'll hold together." The captain nodded, voice steady as he addressed the passengers again. "Ladies and gentlemen, we are in communication with authorities, and everything is under control. Please remain seated. We are taking every step to ensure your safety." His words weren't the whole truth, but they were enough to quiet some of the noise. Marcus turned back to the radar. The three jets flanked them like shadows, guiding them subtly to the east. He shook his head. "They're herding us toward restricted airspace. If we cross that line, we may never leave." The co-pilot whispered, "So what do we do?" Marcus stared at the map, then at the fuel gauge. His mind raced. He remembered a maneuver, something risky, something crazy, but it could buy them precious minutes. He looked at the captain. "I need you to trust me. We're going to feint compliance, just enough to make them think we're following. Then, at the right moment, we'll shift altitude. Not drastic, not reckless, just enough to disrupt their formation." The captain hesitated. "Isn't that dangerous?" With passengers on board, Marcus's eyes were steel. "Everything about this is dangerous, but doing nothing is worse." The silence stretched. Then, finally, the captain nodded. "Tell me what to do." Marcus guided them through the plan, his voice firm, precise, every instruction sharp as a blade. The plane dipped slightly, banking eastward as though obeying the command. The fighter jets adjusted instantly, tightening formation. Passengers gasped at the movement, some crying out, but Marcus kept calm. "Steady, steady." Then, at his signal, the captain adjusted altitude by just a few hundred feet, so subtly that to an untrained eye it might look like turbulence. But to the formation outside, it forced a sudden recalibration. One of the jets veered closer than it intended, breaking its smooth circle. For a split second, their perfect control cracked. Marcus's heart pounded. "There. That's it. Now hold steady." The fighter jets regrouped quickly, but Marcus saw what he needed: hesitation. A small fracture in their confidence. It was enough to buy them time. Back in the cabin, though, panic was reigniting. Passengers clutched each other, convinced they were moments from death. A teenager shouted, "They're going to shoot us." The flight attendants struggled to maintain order, their own voices shaking. Marcus turned sharply to the captain. "We need to tell them the truth. Not all of it, but enough. If they think we're hiding something, panic will tear this plane apart before the jets do." The captain hesitated, then spoke into the intercom. "Ladies and gentlemen, we are currently being escorted by foreign aircraft. We are following procedures and staying in constant communication with authorities. Please remain calm. We are doing everything to ensure a safe arrival." The words settled like a heavy blanket over the cabin. Fear still buzzed, but the honesty, partial as it was, steadied some nerves. Marcus exhaled, staring at the night sky. He knew this was only the beginning. Backup was on its way, but so were more enemies. And before this was over, he might have to step into a role he had sworn never to take again. As he watched the jets outside, circling like vultures, Marcus whispered to himself, "Not this time. I won't lose them. Not again." The minutes dragged on like hours, the passenger plane gliding silently through the night, while death circled just outside its windows. Marcus remained locked on the radar, every sense alert. The 3 Sukhoi fighters hadn't fired, but their formation was tightening again, pressing closer as if ready to strike. Marcus knew the game well. Intimidation, pressure, forcing the weaker party into a mistake. He'd been on both sides of this before. The key was never blinking first. Suddenly, a crackle of static cut through the cockpit. The foreign voice returned, colder this time. "American plane. Last warning. Change course, or we will engage." The co-pilot's hands trembled. "They'll do it. They'll shoot us down." Marcus shook his head firmly. "No, not unless they're ordered. Firing on a civilian aircraft isn't a decision a pilot makes lightly. It sparks wars. They're trying to scare us into obedience." Captain Harris swallowed hard. "But how long can we hold out?" Marcus's eyes flicked to the fuel gauge, then the clock. Long enough. But inside, he wasn't so sure. Every second stretched his nerves thinner. Every movement outside the window reminded him of past missions. Missions that ended in fire. His palms itched with the memory of a joystick, the roar of engines, the split-second decisions that meant life or death. But here, in a slow, lumbering passenger plane, he felt like a lion trapped in a cage. He had the knowledge, but none of the tools. Then, in the distance, faint lights blinked on the horizon. Marcus's breath caught. He leaned forward, eyes narrowing. There. The captain followed his gaze. "What is it?" Marcus's voice was low, steady, but filled with relief. "Backup." Sure enough, 2 distant shapes were closing fast. U.S. Air Force F-15s, sleek and unmistakable even at a distance. The cavalry had arrived. Marcus's chest loosened for the first time in hours. But he knew the danger wasn't over. Not by a long shot. The Sukhoi jets saw them too. Their formation shifted, aggressive, as if preparing to prove they wouldn't back down. The radio crackled again, but now both sides were speaking. American voices, sharp and commanding, ordering the intruders to disengage. The air was thick with tension, like a storm about to break. Down in the cabin, passengers noticed the new arrivals. Faces pressed to the windows, whispers rising into gasps of hope. "Look, more planes. Are they ours?" Relief swept through some rows, but fear still clung tight. What if this meant war? What if they were caught in the middle? Marcus kept his eyes locked on the sky, watching every subtle shift. The Sukhoi pilots weren't retreating. They were holding position, daring the Americans to make the first move. The co-pilot muttered, "This could blow up any second." Marcus nodded grimly. "It's a standoff." The radio buzzed with clipped, heated exchanges, warnings, counter-warnings, orders flying back and forth across languages. Marcus understood enough to know it could go either way. His muscles were coiled tight, his mind running through scenarios. If the enemy fired first, retaliation would be instant. And this plane, caught in the crossfire, wouldn't stand a chance. Captain Harris's voice was tight. "Marcus, if this turns into a fight, what do we do?" Marcus turned to him slowly. "Pray they don't shoot. And if they do, we dive. Fast." The captain paled. With all these passengers, Marcus cut him off. "It's the only way. It's survival." Before the captain could respond, a sharp jolt rocked the plane. Gasps erupted from the cabin. One of the Sukhoi jets had flown dangerously close, rattling them with its wake. A calculated move, a show of dominance. The passengers screamed, some clutching each other, others breaking into sobs. The flight attendants struggled to hold order, but fear had tipped into panic. Marcus slammed a hand on the console. "They're escalating. They want us to panic." The American jets moved in closer, wings flashing warning signals, but the Sukhois matched them, refusing to break off. The sky outside was a dance of steel predators, every move threatening to trigger catastrophe. Then, as if to tip the balance, a voice came over the comms, this time American, calm but firm. "Civilian aircraft, this is Eagle Lead. Maintain your course and altitude. We've got you." Captain Harris's shoulders sagged with relief. Passengers below cheered faintly when the captain relayed the message. But Marcus didn't relax. His eyes stayed sharp, his instincts warning him. "It's not over," he muttered. "Not yet." And he was right. Because in that very moment, one of the Sukhoi jets broke formation and lunged forward, locking position dangerously close to the passenger plane's nose. An unmistakable signal. They weren't leaving without a fight. The American fighters bristled, their voices sharp over the radio, issuing ultimatums. The tension snapped like a stretched wire about to break. Marcus's heart pounded. He knew what was coming. One wrong twitch of a finger, one misunderstood command, and the night sky would explode in fire. Down below, passengers clung to each other as the plane shuddered slightly, voices rising in terror. Some prayed aloud, others whispered goodbyes, convinced these were their final moments. Marcus stared through the cockpit window, his jaw set, his mind racing faster than the jets outside. He had been in standoffs like this before, knew the razor-thin line between peace and destruction. He closed his eyes for a split second, whispered under his breath, "Not again. Not this time." And then his instincts screamed, something was wrong. The way the Sukhoi pilot moved, the angle, the hesitation, it wasn't standard military procedure. It was reckless, desperate. This wasn't just intimidation. Marcus's eyes snapped open. His voice cut through the cockpit like steel. "He's not here to escort. He's here to provoke." The captain blinked. "What do you mean?" Marcus pointed sharply. "That pilot. He's trying to bait the Americans into firing first. If they do, it's war. And we're the spark." The realization hit like a thunderclap. The co-pilot's face drained of color. "So what do we do?" Marcus's voice was grim, steady as stone. "We stop him before he gets what he wants." Outside, the Sukhoi pilot dipped his wing in a way Marcus knew too well. A sign, a dare, a deadly challenge. The Americans held formation, but tension crackled in every movement. The world was balanced on a knife's edge. Marcus gripped the console, his mind racing through possibilities. For the first time, he knew he couldn't just sit back and advise. If this situation was going to be defused, he would have to act. Not as a passenger, not even as a veteran, but as the fighter pilot he once was. The role he had sworn he'd never play again. Marcus's breath slowed, his heartbeat a steady drum in his chest. He hadn't been in uniform for years, but at that moment, every instinct, every lesson, every scar of experience returned with brutal clarity. He could almost feel the joystick in his hand again, the weight of responsibility. Only this time, the stakes weren't a distant battlefield. They were right here, inside this plane filled with families, children, and strangers who had no idea how close they were to vanishing into fire. The Sukhoi jet loomed in front of them, holding position like a predator daring its prey to flinch. Marcus's voice cut through the cockpit. "We have to disrupt him. If he forces the Americans to fire, this entire plane is gone. I need control." The captain froze. "Control? You mean?" Marcus nodded firmly. "Let me handle the maneuvering. I can't fly this like a fighter jet, but I can use its size and weight to throw him off balance." The co-pilot gawked at him. "This is insane. This isn't a combat aircraft. This is a 200-ton passenger plane with hundreds of lives on board." Marcus's eyes narrowed, sharp as steel. "Exactly. And if we don't act, every one of those lives will be lost. Trust me." The cockpit was silent for one agonizing moment. Then, with trembling hands, Captain Harris released his grip and nodded. "It's yours." Marcus slid into the seat, his body remembering controls he hadn't touched in years. Different plane, different layout, but the principles of flight were etched into his very bones. He adjusted quickly, fingers moving with a confidence that startled even himself. "Strap in," he muttered. Then his voice lowered to the radio. "Eagle Lead, this is Marcus Reed, former U.S. Air Force. I've got control of the civilian bird. Don't fire. Repeat, do not fire. I'll handle this." The American pilot's voice snapped back, surprised but steady. "Copy, Reed. Do what you have to. We're covering you." Marcus's jaw tightened. The Sukhoi jet in front of them made another aggressive tilt, trying to force their nose eastward. Marcus didn't resist directly. Instead, he angled the massive passenger plane slightly, making it look clumsy, like turbulence had nudged them. The Sukhoi adjusted to block, but in doing so, it drew closer than intended. Marcus seized the moment. With precise pressure, he dipped the nose and rolled just enough to slide the plane out of the jet's lock. Passengers screamed at the sudden shift, drinks toppled, overhead bins rattled. But Marcus's focus was unbreakable. The Sukhoi pilot scrambled to adjust, his formation wobbling. The Americans moved in instantly, their jets flanking the intruder, weapons locked, but fingers restrained. Marcus steadied their plane again, his voice calm into the radio. "You're boxed in, friend. Walk away." But the Sukhoi didn't back down. Instead, its nose dipped threateningly, aligning dangerously close to their wing. Gasps erupted from the passengers who could see it, voices rising into terrified cries. The co-pilot whispered, "He's going to hit us." Marcus's eyes narrowed. He had seen this tactic before. Close pass intimidation, forcing panic. The problem was, with civilians on board, he couldn't risk a hard evasive maneuver. But maybe he didn't need to. He breathed deeply, then murmured under his breath, "Steady hands, trust the sky." With delicate precision, Marcus angled the massive aircraft upward by only a hair, just enough to create wake turbulence, an invisible wave of disturbed air rolling off their wings. To passengers, it felt like a bump of turbulence. To the Sukhoi pilot, it was a sudden invisible punch. The jet jolted, wobbling violently as the disturbed airflow slammed into it. For a split second, its control faltered. Marcus pressed the advantage, shifting again just enough to magnify the effect. The Sukhoi spun offline, forced to break formation and retreat a few hundred yards to recover. Gasps of awe filled the cockpit. Captain Harris's eyes were wide. You just outmaneuvered him. With a passenger jet. Marcus didn't look away from the sky. He's not done. But the Sukhoi was shaken, and the American fighters didn't miss their chance. They swooped in, bracketing the jet with lethal precision. Over the comms, their voices were sharp and final. "Hostile aircraft, disengage now or be fired upon." The tension stretched. The Sukhoi hovered, circling, its pilot clearly weighing whether the mission was worth dying for. Then, at last, it pulled back, rejoining the two other jets that had been circling distantly. Together, the three intruders banked away, retreating into the dark horizon. The cabin erupted in cheers, cries, and sobs of relief. Strangers hugged each other, children clapped, passengers shouted thanks to God. The flight attendants, pale with exhaustion, smiled shakily, trying to comfort those still trembling. In the cockpit, the Americans confirmed over comms, "Target disengaged. You're clear. We'll escort you the rest of the way." Marcus finally leaned back, his muscles trembling, sweat streaking down his temple. For the first time in hours, he allowed himself a long, slow breath. Captain Harris clapped him on the shoulder, eyes shining with gratitude. "You just saved every soul on this plane. I don't know how to thank you." Marcus shook his head. "Don't thank me. Just get them home." But deep inside, he felt something shift. The ghosts of his past missions, the weight of that one mistake that had driven him from the cockpit, they loosened, just a little. For once, he hadn't been forced to choose who lived and who died. For once, everyone made it. As the plane glided safely toward its destination, escorted like royalty by American fighters, Marcus slipped quietly back to his seat in the cabin. Passengers looked at him with awe, whispering, pointing, but he kept his head down. He wasn't looking for recognition. He just wanted the quiet. The little girl he'd seen earlier, the one who had cried about the planes outside, tugged at his sleeve as he sat down. "Mister, did you save us?" Marcus managed a small smile, his tired eyes soft. "No, sweetheart. The sky just gave us another chance." She beamed, satisfied, before curling against her mother to sleep. And as Marcus leaned against the window, watching the sunrise paint the horizon gold, he finally allowed his eyes to close. For the first time in years, his sleep was peaceful. He had faced the sky again, and this time, he had won. If this story kept you on the edge of your seat, don't forget to hit the like button, share it with your friends, and subscribe to the channel for more powerful stories that will leave you speechless. Your support means everything. See you in the next video.